We will now study an eighth characteristic that will help us to distinguish even more between the soul and the spirit, and for that we have to go to the book of Ezekiel chapter 18. Ezekiel 18, and we'll read a couple of verses from that chapter, and we'll see another characteristic of the soul that is emphasized throughout Scripture. Let's read first in verse 4. Ezekiel 18:4 says, "Behold, all souls are mine. The soul of the Father as well as the soul of the Son is mine. The soul who sins shall die." Notice that the Lord is emphasizing souls as opposed to spirits. He says, all the souls are mine. When he's saying that, he's establishing hegemony or possession over the souls. And as we have seen before, the Lord declares that God is spirit in John 4:24. So he's saying that God, who is spirit, is Lord or has possession over all the souls. So there's like, shall we say, a positional relationship where the spirit is designed to be above the soul. And we see also that the soul is associated here with sin and death. It says the soul who sins shall die. It doesn't say the spirit that sins shall die. So that gives us the conclusion that the soul is associated with sin and death. And we can see the same thing emphasized in verse 20 of the same chapter. Here it says, "The soul who sins shall die. The Son shall not suffer for the iniquity of the Father, nor the Father suffer for the iniquity of the Son. The righteousness of the righteous shall be upon himself, and the wickedness of the wicked shall be upon himself." So again, the soul is being associated with sin and dying, and the accountability is placed on the soul. Now let's go to Hebrews 4:15, and let's see what it has to say about sin, or the possibility of sin. Hebrews chapter 4. We'll read from. Let's read verse 15. It says, "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin." So this means that if we are weak, we are subject to sin. The Lord enveloped himself in weakness and came as a human being, and being weak, he was susceptible to sinning. He was tempted, yet he did not sin. So that's the reason why the soul is the one who is most directly associated with sin in Scripture, because as we've seen before, the soul is weak. It's inherently weaker, while the spirit is inherently stronger. So the spirit is not susceptible to sinning the way the soul is. And as Ezekiel says, as Scripture declares, the soul that sins shall die. Why does it die? As we saw before, the spirit is life-giving. In other words, it's a source of life that gives life outside of itself. And the soul is a harbor for life. It can harbor life. It can be a container of life. Therefore, if the soul is separated from the spirit, then the life supply that's in the soul will eventually run out, and it will die. So that proves or emphasizes a principle that is taught by most preachers, and it is a valid principle, that death speaks of separation. When a person dies physically, the soul is separated from the body. And when a soul dies, the soul is being separated from what? From the spirit. because the spirit is life-giving. So it's like a battery. The soul has a life supply, an inherent life supply, and it continues to run with that shortened life supply. But then, since it's disconnected from the spirit, it dies. So we have and that susceptibility to sin and to death is because the soul is inherently weaker than the spirit. Now let's go to another characteristic. So this is characteristic number 8, that the soul is susceptible to sin and to death. And it's susceptible to death when because of its weakness and because of the fact that it's not a source of life. So if it's separated from the spirit, if something happens that causes the soul to be on its own, to be its own boss, then it will die, because it cannot produce life on its own.